Let's pop you over to Parliament now because the Presidency is currently briefing Parliament watchdog SCOPA on ongoing investigations by the Special Investigating Unit. These include prohibitions, on corrupt individuals in public roles. I see there's a bit of a focus now on PPEs, those are protective equipment during COVID-19. Let's listen in.
That were recommended for restriction from doing business with the state. A comparison or a look at the October 31 version of the National Treasury's database of restricted suppliers indicate that not one of those names of companies appear on that list. So between the issuing of the recommendation by the SIU and the recording of the restriction on the register maintained by National Treasury, there have been no successful restrictions. We have looked in detail at the business process around that, and we will talk a bit more to that later. We have a subsequent slide when we talk to prohibitions and processes around prohibitions. We have engaged with the, together with the Office of the Chief Procurement Officer on various efforts to try and get to the bottom of this. Eskom, for example, and Transnet were the big, had the large numbers of these referrals, and they have restricted on their own internal supplier database. They've given us confirmation of that, but the list of on Treasury's restricted suppliers database, we don't have any correlation. Chair, I'll now move to a discussion on prohibitions as requested on holding public office and doing business with the state. And the committee had requested us to provide information on the formal processes of prohibiting an individual from holding public office or being involved in government contracts due to proven involvement in corrupt activities. And these slides set out various legislative and regulatory measures, as well as processes in place to prevent persons who have been proven to be involved in corruption from either holding public office or doing business with the state. This is an important part of the reform agenda that the CEO mentioned. And given the complexity and scale of the state, we may have missed certain elements of this accountability. So we recognize that more research is required to provide an exhaustive status quo. We also talked to current reforms to address gaps identified. So if we take a broad definition of public office to include both elected and appointed officials, in terms of prohibitions on elected officials holding public office, there are 3 constitutional provisions which stipulate that anyone convicted of an offence and sentenced to more than 12 months imprisonment without the option of a fine is disqualified from being elected to public office, and this disqualification remains in effect for 5 years after the sentence is completed. In terms of processes, the IEC is responsible for vetting candidates against criminal records. Additionally, political parties and other stakeholders may lodge objections to the IEC, and then the IEC can make a ruling. In terms of preventions for appointed officials, in national and provincial departments, which fall under the Public Service Act, there's Regulation 61, which sets out mandatory prohibitions on re-employment after dismissal. And those prohibitions vary in time depending on why the official was dismissed. There's a 5-year prohibition for dismissal linked to corruption and financial misconduct. In terms of the processes used to administer this, the per-cell payroll system is used to enforce restrictions across all provincial and national departments. So a block is put on the payroll system which prevents an employee being hired in any provincial or national department. In the local government sphere, there is Section 57A of the Municipal Systems Act, which requires, amongst others, the Minister of COGTA to issue regulations prescribing prohibitions on employment for persons dismissed for misconduct. There's a 10-year prohibition in the local government sphere. And when we talk about the central register, we'll talk about processes to align these across the different spheres. In terms of the processes, the 2022 amendment to the Municipal Systems Act requires all municipalities to submit records of officials dismissed for misconduct to the relevant MEC and to the Minister of COGTA. And there are regulations that require the municipality to provide shortlisted candidates for checking against this list. COGTA has made efforts to create an online system for this, but that is not yet in place. In terms of public entities, there's no general legislation in place. However, the SOE bill makes provision for the shareholder, who would be the president, subject to the passing of the legislation, to issue regulations requiring information from public entities. Now, that is an important enabler for ensuring that the public administration is able to prevent persons dismissed from one sphere finding employment in another. And this is I'll now go to a project that falls under the President's response to the State Capture Commission called the Central Register, which is a project which aims to link up all the data from the different spheres and public entities of officials dismissed to ensure that there's a single portal to check whether a person has been dismissed from any part of the public service. Currently, for example, in the Public Service Act parts of the state, so that's national and provincial, the Z83 application form requires you to volunteer information if you have been dismissed, but that is on the onus of the person. The central register will provide an ability for an employer to check. So in terms of this project, and it will make a bit more sense once I go through the next slide, we have been, as a task team, working to build the central register, and National Treasury last year issued circular to all public entities requesting records of dismissed officials, adding in the region of about 1,200 ID numbers to this register. So the central register is being developed in response to a directive to DPSA, COGTA, Public Enterprise and National Treasury to collaborate, design and implement appropriate solutions to address the lack of a centralized register of people who've been dismissed from organs of state or who have resigned to avoid being disciplined. The project has successfully deployed an online tool available on the DPSA website, and this allows employers to check whether an ID number corresponds with one linked to a dismissal.
What you're listening to there is the voice of a official from the Presidency briefing Parliament watchdog SCOPA on the SIU's investigations into a whole myriad of issues, including, of course, prohibitions on corrupt individuals taking up public office. You know, often we speak about democracy being in action during election years, or at least on election day. But actually, these are the makings of that process. Legislation being interrogated in Parliament to get us a sense of whether or not it's working. And essentially today, we're taken through the rules as they exist in the country's laws that prevent corrupt officials or people who've been proven to be corrupt from taking up public office. It's important, for example, when you think about, well, perhaps I shouldn't just say corruption, but people who've been convicted for whatever kind of crime. It's important when you think about this during the debate, for example, around whether the former president should in fact be allowed to take up public office in parliament, given his conviction but for being in contempt of court. More recently, there's been a whole lot more of a debate around, for example, Gabelo Kwamanda and the accusations against him, and who in fact should have been best placed to vet him before he was even elected the mayor of Johannesburg. And so the nuts and bolts of that process is what we've just been watching throughout the course of the past couple of minutes in Parliament, and we'll certainly distill it for you and get you a sense of some of the salient points that stick out as we continue listening in to that.